5,000 years ago, in the broad plain between two great rivers, a new chapter in human history was about to unfold. Imagine a flat, alluvial landscape stretching as far as the eye can see, the Tigris and Euphrates winding southward toward the Persian Gulf in twin ribbons of promise and peril. These rivers flooded every spring, depositing fertile silt that turned the desert into a patchwork of marshes and fields, perfect for growing barley, wheat, and dates. But the very abundance of life here carried its own dangers. Unpredictable floods could drown an entire village overnight, while droughts could leave the soil parched and the people starving. It was in this crucible of extremes, around 4,500 BCE, that the Sumerians built the first great cities and, in so doing, invented the foundations of civilization itself. At first, small clusters of huts, constructed from sun-baked mud bricks, dotted the riverbanks. Families lived in extended compounds, sharing cooking fires and stories of gods who ruled the waters and skies. Over generations, these settlements grew larger and more complex. Villages gave way to towns, and towns to walled cities guarded by ramparts that shimmered under the Mesopotamian sun. Each city was a world unto itself, with its own king, its own patron deity, and its own distinctive style of architecture and art. In Uruk, the largest of these early cities, 10,000 people toiled in crowded neighborhoods. Here, craftsmen shaped clay into the first mass-produced pottery. Here, scribes pressed wedge-shaped marks into wet tablets of clay, creating the earliest form of writing. Uruk's massive white temple, dedicated to the sky goddess Anu, towered above the city's mud brick houses like a beacon of human ambition. Nearby, at the temple of Inanna, goddess of love and war, ornate cylinder seals decorated with intricate scenes announced the owner's identity and status, precursors to modern signatures. This transformation from scattered settlements to urban centers required new technologies and social structures. To manage irrigation, the Sumerians built canals, dikes, and reservoirs, controlling the flow of water to fields that lay farther from the rivers. Teams of laborers, organized by temple authorities, dug the canals by hand, moving wheelbarrows of soil under a relentless sun. Year after year, these canals deepened and branched, connecting distant fields to the life-giving waters of the Euphrates and Tigris. The result was a stable food supply that could support large populations and the emergence of a class of specialist craftsmen, traders, and administrators who no longer needed to work the land themselves. As the cities flourished, the Sumerians developed a council of elders and a ruling king, known as a lugal. These rulers presided over legal disputes, led military campaigns, and coordinated the building of city walls and temples. Under their guidance, taxation took shape. Farmers contributed grain to the temple storehouses, while traders and artisans paid dues in the form of livestock or crafted goods. The temple thus became not only a religious center but also the economic hub of the city, a proto-bureaucracy that recorded transactions on clay tablets and enforced property rights through written contracts. With the complexities of city life mounting, the Sumerians faced new challenges. Disputes over water rights could spark deadly feuds between neighboring cities. To resolve these conflicts and ensure fairness, scribes recorded legal codes on clay steels. These early laws covered everything from theft and assault to marriage and inheritance. They established penalties, fines, restitution, even corporal punishment that could be applied consistently. The mere existence of written laws represented a radical departure from earlier, more arbitrary forms of justice, laying the groundwork for stable governance. Trade networks extended the Sumerians' reach far beyond the floodplain. Donkey caravans carried grain, textiles, and crafted goods to distant lands, while boats plied the rivers, laden with copper from Oman and timber from the distant mountains of Lebanon. In return, Sumerian merchants imported precious stones, metals, and exotic woods, enriching their culture and inspiring new forms of art. The Sumerian city of Ur became a bustling port, where goods from as far away as the Indus Valley arrived on wide, flat-bottomed boats. The rapid pace of innovation and expansion also demanded new forms of communication. Around 3200 BCE, the Sumerians began to use pictographic marks on clay tablets, simplified drawings that represented commodities like barley, sheep, or jars of oil. Over time, these pictographs evolved into a streamlined system of wedge-shaped strokes pressed with a triangular stylus. This cuneiform script could capture not only numbers and transactions but also laws, myths, hymns, and letters. In the dimly lit scriptoriums of the temple schools, young scribes mastered hundreds of signs and the complex rules of grammar that would allow them to record history and compose epic poetry. One of the earliest surviving literary works, inscribed around 2100 BCE, recounts the adventures of Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, and his quest for immortality. This epic reveals a Sumerian world rich in myth and philosophy, divine councils debating the fate of humanity, monstrous animals guarding sacred forests, and heroes challenging the boundaries between life and death. The story of Gilgamesh not only entertained its original audience, but also conveyed timeless questions about friendship, power, and the inevitability of death. Meanwhile, Sumerian priests studied the sky as keenly as scribes studied cuneiform. They identified constellations and tracked the movements of the moon and planets using a base, 60 mathematical system that survives in our 360-degree circles and our division of hours into 60 minutes. Zodiacal signs and lunar months helped them predict agricultural cycles and religious festivals. The priests' observations, recorded over centuries on clay tablets, represented the first systematic attempts to understand celestial phenomena, a legacy that would influence astronomy and mathematics for millennia. The invention of the wheel, too, transformed Sumerian life. First used on pottery wheels by ceramists around 3500 BCE to produce uniform vessels at high speed, the wheel soon appeared on chariots and carts. These wheeled vehicles sped up travel and trade, and they reshaped warfare. Kings could now field chariot regiments armed with bows and spears, giving rise to organized armies that could project power across the landscape. Fortified city walls, once sufficient defense against raiding bands, now had to withstand sieges involving engines of war drawn by oxen or donkeys. By the dawn of the 3rd millennium BCE, the city-states of Sumer had established a remarkable balance between competition and cooperation. They shared a common language and religion, worshipping a pantheon of gods who personified elemental forces, Enlil, lord of the air, Enki, god of water and wisdom, Inanna, goddess of love, sex, and war. Grand temples, rising on massive mud-brick platforms called ziggurats, symbolized the bridge between heaven and earth. Pilgrims traveled from far and wide to honor the deities and to pay their respects at the temple gates, where they donated offerings that fueled the engines of the economy. Yet this very thriving sowed the seeds of conflict. Kings sought to extend their dominion, and cities alternately rose to power or fell to their neighbors. Temporary alliances formed, broken as quickly as they were made, as each Lugal strove to claim supremacy. It was only when Sargon of Akkad emerged, somewhere around 2334 BCE, that the disparate city-states were united under a single ruler, marking the transition from independent Sumerian cities to the first true empire of Mesopotamia. But that story belongs to the next chapter. For now, we stand at the threshold of Sumer's golden age, awed by the ingenuity that turned mud and water into cities, script, and civilization itself. The tools and ideas born here would ripple across the centuries, shaping empires yet to come and leaving an indelible mark on every corner of the ancient world. As we turn our attention to the details of Sumerian life, its temples, its schools, its workshops, we begin to understand how a people writing in clay tablets and building with sun-baked bricks could invent the very foundations of human progress. Beneath the soaring terraces of the ziggurat at Uar stood an entirely different world, an internal network of corridors, storage rooms, and sanctuaries where the Sumerian priesthood carried out its daily rituals. The temple was not merely a place of worship. It was the economic engine of the city, the seat of learning, and the repository of knowledge. Here, the scent of incense mingled with the earthy aroma of pressed grain, while the low murmur of supplicants bidding homage to their gods drifted across stone thresholds smoothed by countless bare feet. Within the temple precincts, priests and priestesses performed the rituals that were believed to sustain the cosmos itself. At dawn, the chief priest, clad in a robe dyed with lapis lazuli and trimmed with gold, would wash the statue of the city's patron deity in a font of sacred water. With meticulous care, he anointed its lips with fragrant oils and wrapped its feet in fresh linens. Offerings of bread, beer, and livestock stood ready on alabaster tables, each gift inscribed with the donor's name and the date, recorded on clay tags that now lie buried in modern museum storerooms. These religious ceremonies served two critical functions. First, they were acts of reciprocity, a way to repay the gods for the bounty of the fields, the flow of the rivers, and the health of the people. Second, they reinforced the social hierarchy. The priests, acting as intermediaries between mortals and the divine, wielded considerable influence. Temple activities employed hundreds of people: weavers, brewers, farmers, scribes, and architects, all contributing labor, produce, or crafted goods to the temple's vast holdings. At the heart of this complex lay the scribal schools, or adubas, where the next generation of administrators and clerics learned their trade. Adolescent boys, often the sons of wealthy patrons, arrived before sunrise to practice the art of cuneiform. Their tools were simple: a sharpened reed stylus and a tray of moist clay tablets. Day after day, they traced the same wedge-shaped signs under the watchful eye of a master scribe, drilling multiplication tables, lexical lists, and model letters. Mistakes were punished by public humiliation or corporal discipline, for mastery of writing was the gateway to power, prestige, and a secure livelihood within the temple bureaucracy. Beyond the temple walls, the Sumerians' craftsmanship flourished. Workshops clustered around the ziggurat produced a dazzling array of goods. Metalworkers in Uruk fashioned bronze tools and weapons by combining copper from Oman with tin from distant Anatolia. Potter's wheels spun out uniform jars, bowls, and oil lamps that were traded across the Near East. Textiles, linen woven from flax or wool dyed in vivid plant-based hues, wrapped bodies and adorned temples alike. Cylinder seals, no larger than a thumb, were engraved with mythological scenes and civic emblems. Rolled across wet clay, they left an indelible signature that authenticated contracts and guarded storerooms. Trade caravans, escorted by soldiers bearing leather shields and spears, carried these wares along dusty routes to Elam, the Persian Gulf, and the Indus Valley. In return, Sumerian merchants imported ivory from Punt, perhaps modern Somalia, lapis lazuli from today's Afghanistan, and carnelian from the Indus region. Each shipment arrived with stories of foreign kings and strange customs, broadening the horizons of Sumerian society and fueling a thirst for new materials and ideas. Meanwhile, the Sumerians continued to refine their mathematical and astronomical knowledge. Temple scribes recorded the movements of Venus and the phases of the moon, correlating celestial cycles with seasonal floods. They devised tables to predict eclipse patterns and computed the area of irregular fields by subdividing them into triangles and rectangles, a procedure described in tablets that survived millennia later. This practical geometry facilitated land surveys, ensuring that temple administrators could allocate plots to farmers with mathematical precision. Music and the arts, too, were nurtured within these sacred precincts. Lyres adorned with inlaid shells and precious metals found their way into the hands of skilled musicians, whose melodies accompanied festivals, royal ceremonies, and funerary rites. Hymns written in praise of Enlil, Inanna, and other deities were recited by trained choirs, their words structured in elegant poetry that balanced repetition with refrains. Sculptors carved votive statues, standing figures with hands clasped in prayer, that lined the inner sanctuaries, each bearing the likeness of the donor and an inscription beseeching divine favor. Templar records also reveal a surprising versatility in Sumerian society. In times of crisis, drought, flood, or war, the temple stores supplied grain, livestock, and oil to the population, acting as an early form of public relief. This stockpiling of resources, managed through meticulously maintained ledgers, reflected a proto-welfare system that safeguarded the community against the vagaries of nature and politics. Yet the influence of the temple extended beyond material wealth and religious observance. It fostered intellectual exchange, preserving myths, proverbs, and wisdom literature that spoke to the human condition. Proverbs tablet collections, like the instructions of Shurapak, offered moral guidance, blending practical advice, do not answer back against your father, with philosophical reflections on fate and divine will. Such texts demonstrate that Sumerians probed questions of justice, piety, and the fleeting nature of life, concerns that resonate across cultures and epochs. As the shadow of the Akkadian conquest began to fall in the late 24th century BCE, these temple institutions would adapt to new rulers, languages, and religious practices. Nonetheless, the fundamental model, the temple as nexus of religion, economy, and learning, survived for centuries, carried forward by successive empires. Today, when we walk among the ruined ziggurats of Ur and Nippur, we glimpse the legacy of a society that wove together faith and function in a way that still shapes our world. The Sumerians' ingenuity extended beyond temples and scribal schools into the very structure of law and governance, laying down principles that would echo through millennia. By the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE, city-state rulers sought to codify justice more systematically than the earlier ad hoc decrees. Around 2100 BCE, during the 3rd dynasty of Ur, King Uarnama promulgated what is often considered the world's earliest law code. Inscribed in Sumerian on clay tablets, the Code of Uarnama opened with a prologue that invoked the king's duty to prevent the strong from crushing the weak and bring about justice in the land. The laws themselves prescribed specific penalties, usually fines in silver or livestock, rather than corporal punishment, reserving physical penalties for the most severe crimes such as murder or adultery. Offenses like theft incurred restitution of 1.5 times the value taken, while false accusations demanded similar compensation. This commitment to proportional restitution planted the seed for equitable legal systems in later civilizations. Yet written laws alone could not guarantee order. Administration required a bureaucracy capable of implementing judgments, collecting taxes, and maintaining public works. The Sumerians refined an administrative apparatus built around the temple economy. Temple storehouses, once mere granaries for surplus grain, evolved into regional distribution centers. Temple officials maintained meticulous ledgers, clay tablets listing names, quantities, dates, and destinations, functioning as a proto-accounting system. District governors, appointed by the Lugal or high priest, oversaw smaller administrative units called ensiates, each responsible for allocating resources, conscripting labor for irrigation works, and organizing corvée labor for palace and temple construction. Military organizations similarly matured. Early conflicts between city-states such as Lagash and Umma had been fought by conscripted farmers bearing simple spears and woven reed shields. By the reign of Shusin, circa 2037 to 2029 BCE, Uar's armies included professional soldiers equipped with bronze helmets, chainmail shirts, and composite bows. Chariots drawn by donkeys or onagers appeared on battlefields, providing mobile platforms for archers. Siege warfare evolved with the introduction of battering rams and scaling ladders, while fortified city walls grew thicker and higher, punctuated by rectangular bastions and angled crenellations to improve defensive fire. Diplomacy played a crucial role alongside force. Marriage alliances between ruling families, such as the daughter of Uarnama wed to a daughter of Elamite king Puzur-Shushanak, cemented political ties and facilitated trade agreements. Long-distance envoys, traveling on riverboats or donkey caravans, carried not only tribute but also letters sealed with cylinder seals to guarantee authenticity. The exchange of gifts, lapis lazuli, fine textiles, precious metals, symbolized mutual respect and bound distant polities into loose confederations. As the third dynasty of Uar began to falter under pressures of Elamite incursions, internal rebellions, and ecological strains, soil salinization, and declining irrigation yields, the Sumerians' once dynamic political landscape shifted. Cuneiform archives record rising grain prices and delayed harvests, suggesting that increasingly brackish water hampered agriculture. Temple administrators struggled to feed city populations, and discontent grew among laborers pressed into canal repair and flood control projects. In about 2004 BCE, Elamite forces sacked Uar, ending the Third Dynasty and ushering in a period of decentralization. Many southern cities reverted to local rule, while northern cities such as Isin and Larsa vied for supremacy. It was during this era that the law codes of Lipitishtar of Isin, circa 1934 BCE, and Hammurabi of Babylon, circa 1792 BCE, emerged, building on Sumerian legal traditions with expanded provisions and harsher penalties. Though Hammurabi's code postdates the Sumerians proper, it confirms the enduring influence of their legal and administrative models across Mesopotamia. Meanwhile, Sumerian culture persisted through adaptation. Local rulers continued to patronize temples, sponsoring the repair of ziggurats and the recarving of votive inscriptions in archaic Sumerian script. The language itself remained the lingua franca of scholarship and ritual long after native speakers shifted to Akkadian. Priests and scribes studied Sumerian as a sacred tongue, much like Latin in medieval Europe. By the early 2nd millennium BCE, the great Sumerian city-states had faded as political entities, absorbed into the larger empires of the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Kassites. Yet everyday life in southern Mesopotamia still reflected Sumerian inventions and institutions: canal irrigation, city planning, legal administration, and cuneiform writing endured. From the smallest schoolhouse where apprentice scribes practiced their wedges to the grand halls of royal palaces, the imprint of Sumerian civilization was unmistakable. The legacy of Sumerian governance, law codes, bureaucratic record-keeping, taxation systems, and diplomatic protocols would influence empires for centuries to come. When Alexander the Great marched into Babylon in 331 BCE, he found an administrative framework still echoing the clay tablet offices of Ur and Uruk. Roman governors issuing edicts in distant provinces, medieval caliphs codifying Sharia, and modern legislators drafting national constitutions all stand on the shoulders of those first Sumerian scribes who dared to carve laws into clay. As we continue our journey through Sumerian achievements, we will turn next to their breakthroughs in science and mathematics, how they measured time, charted the heavens, and devised computational methods that underpin our modern world. We will explore the tablets that reveal their tables of reciprocals, quadratic equations, and geometric theorems, a testament to a people who believed that understanding the cosmos began with careful observation and disciplined calculation. In the cool pre-dawn air of Ur's temple courtyard, scribes gathered around low benches holding trays of wet clay tablets. Long before sunrise, they pressed their reed styluses into the soft surface, inscribing columns of wedge-shaped marks that recorded not grain or offerings, but numbers, calculations that would shape the Sumerians' understanding of the world. It was here, in these adubas, that the foundations of mathematics and astronomy were laid. The Sumerians divided the circle and the hour into 360 and 60 parts respectively, a legacy of their sexagesimal or base 60 system. This choice was both practical and ingenious. 60 is divisible by 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, making it easy to share, partition, and calculate. Farmers and merchants used it every day. Measures of grain, lengths of canals, and even the portions of temple offerings were tracked in units like the sar 3,600, the talent, a large weight, the mina, a medium weight, and the shekel, a smaller weight. All interrelated through multiples of 60. But their real innovation lay in abstraction. Early tablets show that by 2600 BCE, scribes could solve equations we would now recognize as quadratic. Given the sum of a length and its reciprocal, find each measure. Other exercises asked for the diagonal of a rectangle, anticipating the Pythagorean theorem by centuries, by subdividing the shape into right triangles and applying approximation tables. These computational techniques were recorded in reciprocal tables that listed pairs of numbers whose product was 1 in base, 60, allowing scribes to turn division into multiplication and vastly speed up complex accounting. Above these clay schoolrooms, the temple's high chamber offered an unobstructed view of the sky. Here, astronomer priests charted the moon's phases and the wanderings of Venus. By noting that a lunar month averaged about 29.5 days, they reconciled their calendar, 12 lunar months, with the solar year by occasionally inserting an intercalary month. Their observations over generations yielded a lunisolar calendar remarkably accurate for its time, guiding planting seasons and holy festivals. Star catalogs, inscribed on slender tablets, listed constellations by name: the Plough, modern Triangulum, the Great Swallow, Andromeda, and the Old Man, Pegasus. They divided the sky into 3 stations along the ecliptic, each tied to one of the major deities: Enlil, Anu, and Enki. These celestial divisions helped them predict the timing of flood season rituals and royal enthronements, weaving astronomy into both civil and sacred life. Mathematical innovation also touched architecture. When constructing a ziggurat sloping sides, builders relied on ratio tables that told them, for every 5 units of rise, how many units of run would yield the desired slope, anticipating the sign tables of later astronomers. Surveyors used knotted cords of fixed length, akin to a portable measuring tape, to lay out city walls and subdivide fields with precision. The temple archives include detailed records of land surveys, each plot's length and breadth noted to the nearest susag, roughly 1 foot, ensuring that taxes and allocations were fair. By the early 3rd millennium BCE, this mathematical tradition had produced problem tablets that presented real-world challenges: calculate the volume of a granary bin shaped like a truncated pyramid, or determine how many bricks of given dimensions are needed to build a 30-cubit wall. Solutions were worked out step by step, not as rote formulas but as reasoned sequences, a glimpse of abstract problem-solving at its dawn. Meanwhile, astronomers translated these calculations into omens. A treaty signed by Lugal-Zagizi of Umma around 2370 BCE invoked celestial portents recorded on tablets decades earlier. If a wolf appeared in the city at sunset, the omens predicted strife. If Venus rose at sunrise, peace and plenty. These associations between astronomical observations and earthly events formed the basis of Mesopotamian astrology, a system later adopted and expanded by Babylonian and Assyrian scholars. The union of mathematics and astronomy also had practical benefits. Temple engineers relied on star-based timekeeping to regulate water releases from reservoirs. At the sighting of certain stars, irrigation gates were opened or closed to control the flow into field channels. Merchant ships on the Euphrates navigated by stellar reference points, timing departures to coincide with favorable currents and lunar phases. Through these endeavors, the Sumerians transformed raw observation into systematic knowledge. Their tables of reciprocals, their multiplication and division algorithms, and their celestial maps set standards for precision and abstraction that would endure long after their cities faded. When Babylonian scholars inherited cuneiform tablets in the 2nd millennium BCE, they found not mere curiosities but robust scientific frameworks that would influence Greek geometry, Hellenistic astronomy, and, ultimately, the scientific revolution. As dawn finally broke and the sun's rays filtered through the reed screens of the Adaba, a young apprentice traced his final wedge mark for the day. With a satisfied stroke, he completed the calculation that would ensure fair distribution of barley to the temple workers. In that simple act, marking a number on clay, the Sumerian enterprise of measurement, prediction, and abstraction carried on, forging a legacy that underpins our modern world. Soon, we will turn our attention to another Sumerian breakthrough, the art and technology of writing itself, and how clay tablets came to record everything from epic myths to everyday ledgers. In the dim glow of an oil lamp, a young scribe unrolled a fresh sheet of fine clay across his lap. His reed stylus, sharpened to a neat wedge, hovered for a moment before pressing into the malleable surface. With each deliberate stroke, simple pictures, the pictographs transformed into abstract wedges, compressed and arranged in tidy rows. This was no mere record of commerce. Here, writing itself became an art and a technology that would define civilization. Long before cuneiform's wedge-shaped marks, Sumerian scribes had used pictograms, small clay tokens and seal impressions picturing sheep, jars, or grain. But around 3200 BCE, faced with ever-growing economic complexity, temple rations, land leases, labor obligations, they needed a faster, more flexible system. The solution emerged. Instead of rounding up countless tokens, they pressed a stylus into a clay tablet, leaving a quick impression. Over generations, these impressions shed their pictographic details and converged into the 600-plus wedge shapes of classical cuneiform. The scribal schools, Adabas, became living workshops of innovation. Apprentices traced proto-cuneiform signs on damp clay. Masters drilled them in the proper angle and depth of each wedge. They learned to draw entire arguments, phonetic signs representing syllables, determinatives marking gods or cities, and logograms standing for whole words. Soon, the script could capture not only commodity counts but prayers, treaties, and even love letters. Once dried in the sun or kiln-baked for permanence, these tablets joined the archives of temples, palaces, and private households. A single clay tablet could hold a king's decree alongside a shipment manifest. Businessmen recorded loans of silver with precise interest rates. Farmers inscribed seed distributions so that when harvest came, temple officials could verify each share. The temple economy ran on these tablets: receipts for offerings, inventories of livestock, lists of craftsmen and their wages. In this way, writing served as the circulatory system of Sumerian society. But Sumerians did not stop at administration. They harnessed writing to shape ideas, to carry their voices across centuries. The earliest known literary fragment, written around 2600 BCE, is a series of proverbs, succinct, pointed distillations of social wisdom. He who does not chase the runaway ox will never taste abundance. Echoing through the halls of the Adabas. Over time, they expanded their repertoire. Hymns to Inanna that swelled with poetic parallelism, laments that personified the seasons as capricious deities, and royal inscriptions that chronicled building projects in rich, formal language. Cylinder seals, small cylinders of stone or metal carved with miniature scenes, became both functional tools and works of art. When rolled across wet clay, they left continuous impressions, interlocking gods and monsters, rituals of sacrifice, or cuneiform labels declaring property of King Shulgi. These seals authenticated documents, protected storerooms, and even served as personal jewelry, tiny biographies wrapped around a thumb. Perhaps the most dazzling testament to Sumerian literary ambition is the Epic of Gilgamesh. Though the surviving Old Babylonian versions date to centuries later, its Sumerian precursors tell of the semi-divine king of Uruk, his friendship with the wild man Enkidu, and their defiance of the gods. Tablet fragments preserve tales of mountain hunts, divine conversations, and the quest for immortality. Through cuneiform, the Sumerians wrestled with mortality, heroism, and the power of storytelling itself. Writing also revolutionized memory. Whereas earlier cultures relied on oral tradition, songs, and recitations, the Sumerians could externalize knowledge, astronomical tables, mathematical exercises, medicinal recipes, magical incantations. A scribal family's library could contain volumes on herb lore next to star charts predicting eclipses. Temple scholars copied and recopied these texts, ensuring that a flood, a fire, or a foreign conquest would not erase their cumulative wisdom. Innovation continued on the material side as well. Clay tablets were sometimes coated with a thin layer of fine, white clay, epidius, so that ink, rather than clay impressions, could be used. With reed pen in hand, scribes wrote on these tablets in black and red ink, the latter marking headings or corrections. This hybrid technology anticipated the later use of parchment and paper elsewhere, showing that Sumerian ingenuity extended beyond cuneiform's angular beauty. By the 2nd millennium BCE, cuneiform had spread across Mesopotamia and beyond. Elamites, Hittites, and Persians borrowed the script to write their own languages. Hittites adapted Sumerian logograms into a syllabary that fit Indo-European phonetics. Even in the Greek-speaking Seleucid period, scribes in Uruk still memorized Sumerian lexical lists, fish written in Sumerian next to its Akkadian equivalent, more as scholarly exercises than for everyday use. Yet as powerful as writing was, it remained a specialized skill. Scribes occupied an elite class. They wore distinctive robes, received rations of oil and grain, and could rise to become temple administrators or royal secretaries. Their profession was ritualized. Upon graduation, a novice might call down curses on anyone who altered his tablets or spilled his clay. The written word was sacred, a bond between the mortal and the divine. Today, when archaeologists unearth broken tablets in the ruins of Nippur or Eridu, they piece together shards to reconstruct temple accounts, love notes, and epic tales. Each fragment reminds us that the Sumerians did more than record transactions. They forged a technology of thought. Through clay and stylus, they discovered that ideas, once set in writing, could outlast kings and conquerors, linking us across 5 millennia to the moment when a scribe first turned a simple pictogram into a wedge-shaped world. Clay tablets and styluses may have given the Sumerians their voice, but it was their hands and their inventive spark that transformed raw materials into the tools of civilization. Around 3500 BCE, somewhere in southern Mesopotamia, a potter's wheel began to spin, first turned by hand, then by a simple flywheel weighted with clay. With a rotating platform, vessels grew more uniform and delicate. Bowls with flaring rims, storage jars tall enough to protect precious grain from pests, and slim-necked amphorae perfect for carrying oil and perfume. The wheel didn't just speed production, it allowed artisans to experiment with new shapes and proportions, laying the groundwork for industrial craftsmanship. Not long after, the wheel found its way onto the steppe, where carts and chariots rolled along muddy tracks between cities. Early Sumerian wagons were heavy affairs, solid wood wheels bound with leather lashings, but they cut transport times in half. Grain from the fields could reach temple storehouses faster. Merchants could push deeper into the desert, their donkeys straining under bales of wool or baskets of dried fish. And in battle, the wheel gave birth to the chariot, a light, two-wheeled vehicle pulled by onagers or donkeys, bristling with archers and spearmen whose speed and surprise reshaped the tactics of war. Meanwhile, the Sumerians mastered metals. In the shadow of the ziggurat at Uruk, coppersmiths hammered native copper into simple daggers and axes. By combining this metal with tin imported from Anatolia, they forged bronze, harder, more durable, and capable of holding a razor edge. Bronze sickles made harvest more efficient. Bronze saws cut timber for doorposts and beams. Bronze spearheads and arrowheads gave soldiers an edge in skirmishes. The ability to cast alloyed metal in a clay mold marked a revolution. For the first time, tools and weapons could be mass-produced with consistent quality. In their workshops, metallurgists also experimented with surface treatments. Burnishing gave axes and blades a mirror sheen that resisted corrosion. Inlaying copper with silver or gold turned a simple knife into a symbol of rank. Workshops specialized. One guild of smiths produced agricultural implements. Another crafted ritual vessels for the temples. A third forged the elegant swords and halberds carried by city guards. Each guild passed down its secret recipes and techniques in scribal handbooks, ensuring that innovations did not vanish with any one craftsman's death. But metal and clay were only part of the story. Sumerian builders perfected brick making, sun-dried for ordinary walls, kiln-fired for foundations and monumental structures. They added straw to the clay mix to prevent cracking and designed bricks in standard sizes, about 30 by 30 by 8 centimeters, so that walls could be laid swiftly in courses. Mud-brick arches spanned doorways. Corbelled vaults created dimly lit chambers inside palaces, and the ziggurats themselves rose in terraces, each layer slightly smaller than the one below, crowned by a sanctuary that seemed to bridge earth and sky. Irrigation technology reached its apex in the canals of Lagash and Umma. Canal banks were reinforced with bundled reeds and brushwood. Sluice gates, wooden panels fitted into grooves, controlled water flow to individual fields. Seasonal maintenance was a communal ritual. Every citizen, from laborer to priest, joined in the clearing of silt and the repair of embankments. These massive public works prevented catastrophic floods in high water years, boosted yields in dry seasons, and forged a sense of shared destiny among the populace. Perhaps the most unassuming yet transformative invention was the plow. Early farmers used pointed sticks to break the soil, but soon they yoked oxen to heavy, arch-shaped plows with a bronze tip. The blade sliced through root mats, turning under the nutrient-rich topsoil and allowing seeds to take root more deeply. Yields of barley and wheat increased dramatically, supporting urban growth and feeding standing armies. In the marketplaces of Uar and Nippur, technology drew buyers from afar. Carpenters displayed furniture reinforced with bronze nails. Leatherworkers offered sandals whose soles were stamped with a lubricating oil to repel water, and glassmakers experimented with colored pastes that would one day become the first stained glass. Textile production likewise evolved. The warp-weighted loom gave way to the vertical loom, enabling weavers to produce wider bolts of cloth and wool, linen, and even silk traded from the Indus Valley. Sumerian innovation was not haphazard but cumulative. Each breakthrough, wheel, bronze, bricks, irrigation, plows, built on what came before, creating a feedback loop of creativity. Temple archives carefully recorded new techniques alongside economic transactions, ensuring that a novel design or alloy recipe could be disseminated among workshops across the city-states. By the mid-3rd millennium BCE, these technologies underpinned a thriving urban economy. Grain stores in the temples brimmed, workshops hummed with activity, and the streets, dirt-packed but orderly, buzzed with donkey carts, merchants, and pilgrims. The Sumerians showed that invention thrives not only in the individual mind but in society. When infrastructure, patronage, and written record converge, human ingenuity can reshape the world. Next, we will explore the rich tapestry of Sumerian religion and myth, how their gods and cosmology influenced every aspect of life, from the rise of kings to the fall of civilizations. At the very heart of Sumerian life beat a vibrant tapestry of gods, myths, and rituals, elements so interwoven with daily existence that no action, from sowing seed to raising children, occurred without divine acknowledgement. Each city-state claimed its own patron deity, yet the pantheon was shared across Mesopotamia. Enlil, lord of wind and air; Enki, master of water and wisdom; Inanna, fierce goddess of love and war; Utu, sun god and dispenser of justice; Ninursag, mother of mountains and fertility. Temples dedicated to these deities were not merely places of worship but living institutions, where the will of the gods was interpreted through omens, sacrifices, and elaborate festivals. Festivals formed the sacred calendar's backbone. Inanna's sacred marriage ritual in Uruk marked the new year, when the king, in veiled submission, symbolically united with the goddess to ensure fertility of fields and people. Streets poured with music and dance. Lyres and drums accompanied processions of priests bearing reed-covered statues, while the populace offered garlands of flowers and baskets of date cakes. At the Zagmuk festival, a week of feasting and mock battles before the vernal equinox, crowds watched actors reenact the cosmic struggle between Marduk and the sea monster Tiamat, an enactment of creation itself that bound community, kings, and cosmos in unity. Sacrifice, and its careful performance, was the medium of communion between mortals and immortals. On altars of white alabaster, the lifeblood of sheep or cattle glistened before the eyes of the god statue. Priests, garbed in linen robes scented with cedar oil, carved off portions for the god, then distributed the remainder to temple workers and worshippers. Libations of beer, the common man's staple, flowed from ornate vessels as priests intoned hymns, complex compositions of parallelism and repetition, each line reflecting cosmic balance. These hymns, preserved on clay tablets, praise the gods' powers and recount their deeds, but also acknowledge human dependence on divine mercy. Mythic narratives offered deeper insight into the Sumerian worldview. In the Enki and Ninmah creation myth, the god Enki fashions humanity from clay, irrigating them with his own waters. In the Descent of Inanna, the Queen of Heaven ventures into the underworld, stripped of power and reborn. An allegory of death and regeneration. These stories were not mere entertainment, but living texts recited at temple gatherings, teaching ethics, social roles, and the fragility of human existence. Young scribes memorized them alongside lexical lists, ensuring that myth and language evolved in tandem. Every household also found its place in the divine order. Domestic altars, small clay stands set beneath a reed canopy, bore oil lamps and bowls of millet. Families invoked household gods such as Alad, the protective spirit of the hearth, by leaving out morning and evening offerings. Because misfortune often signaled divine displeasure, ordinary people consulted extispicy priests who examined sheep livers for portentous markings, or camped in ruined temples waiting for oracle stones to speak the will of the gods. Religion permeated every nook of life, from naming a newborn, so that its destiny aligned with Enlil's breath, to mourning the dead with laments that guided the soul through the netherworld. Art and iconography mirrored religious devotion. Cylinder seals rolled across clay walls depicted not only pastoral scenes but also assemblies of deities arrayed around the sacred tree of life. Reliefs carved on temple walls showed triumphant kings escorting offerings to gods, their crowns topped by stylized horns symbolizing divine sanction. Statues of worshippers, hands clasped, eyes wide, lined temple staircases, each a silent prayer cast in gypsum or diorite, reminding the living that piety lived in perpetual motion. Through these layers of ritual, myth, and art, the Sumerians fashioned a cosmos where humans and gods cooperated and sometimes competed in an eternal dance. Their temples stood as microcosms of the universe, ziggurats rising through terrace levels, each ascent a step from earth toward heaven. In that ascent we glimpse the Sumerian conviction that by honoring forces greater than ourselves, by inscribing our names on clay, and by gathering in song and sacrifice, we became part of a story that outlasted kings, outlasted empires, and still echoes in every city built, every law written, every star charted, and every prayer whispered across the millennia. Under the flicker of flickering lamps, the Sumerians turned their attention from the clay tablets of law and commerce to the mysteries of the human body. Medicine in Sumer was a blend of empirical observation and ritual practice, an art born of necessity in a world where infection, injury, and childbirth all carried high risks. Scribes in temple libraries copied diagnostic handbooks that organized symptoms into systematic categories. A lesion on the skin, fever, or coughing might be recorded alongside omens, whether the patient's fate was tied to celestial alignments or the anger of a minor deity. Physicians, known as ASU, studied these texts and learned to distinguish between hand of the god, afflictions, diseases sent by a deity, and those caused by humoral imbalances in the body's waters. Herbal pharmacology flourished in palace and temple gardens. Clusters of date palms shaded beds of licorice, coriander, and cumin. Reeds grew beside plots of mustard and peppermint. Mixtures of ground frankincense and myrrh soothed inflamed gums, while poultices of crushed willow bark, rich in early precursors to salicylic acid, relieved pain. A standard formulary listed dozens of plant-based remedies, poultices to draw out toxins, infusions as diuretics, and inhalations of sulfur and juniper to clear the airways. Surgical tools, fashioned from bronze and obsidian, reveal that Sumerian practitioners performed basic operations. Small bronze knives and forceps could lacerate abscesses or extract embedded splinters, while obsidian blades, razor-sharp by nature, allowed delicate incisions. Though anesthetics were rudimentary, perhaps opium-infused beer or aromatic inhalants, they testify to a practical approach: treat the wound, staunch the bleeding, and then turn to the divine for healing. Magic and medicine were inseparable. ASU physicians often collaborated with Asapa, ritual specialists who recited incantations and offered sacrifices to counteract malevolent spirits. To cure a child's persistent fever, a mother might place an effigy of her son in a clay prison within the temple precinct, symbolically detaining the demon responsible for the illness. Once the Asapu had bound the spirit, the child would be bathed in holy water and anointed with oils consecrated in the name of Gula, the healing goddess. Women occupied critical roles in this system. Midwives honored as Sapertu guided mothers through childbirth, using herbal compresses and massage techniques to alleviate complications. The womb was understood as a vessel sensitive to both physical and spiritual forces. Midwives invoked Mother Goddess Ninhursag for protection, while applying poultices of charred grain to stimulate contractions or soften tissue. Public health emerged as an extension of temple welfare. During times of famine or epidemic, palace administrators distributed rations of barley and beer enriched with licorice extract, believed to boost immunity. Clay tablets record organized quarantines. Houses where disease struck were sealed, and their occupants cared for within temple compounds until deemed healthy. These measures, combining diet, isolation, and ritual, reflect an early understanding that community well-being depended on both material relief and spiritual harmony. Beyond medicine, the Sumerians appreciated leisure and cultural pursuits as essential to mental health. Music, already central to religious festivals, found its way into healing rituals. Harp melodies accompanied the recitation of hymns to Gula, soothing both mind and body. Poetry, too, served a therapeutic role. Laments for the dead and songs of deliverance allowed individuals to process grief and reaffirm communal bonds. Through this fusion of observation, experimentation, and reverence for the unseen, the Sumerians forged a holistic medical tradition. Their tablets, whether prescribing a herbal decoction, detailing surgical instruments, or invoking a divine curse on a malign spirit, preserve a vision of health as a balance between body, mind, and cosmos. This legacy of integrative care would echo through Babylonian, Assyrian, and later Hellenistic practices, reminding us that even in the cradle of civilization, healing was as much about hope and ritual as it was about remedy. In the narrow lanes between brick houses, Sumerian daily life unfolded at a pace both bustling and familiar. Families clustered around central courtyards, where women ground grain in stone mortars, kneaded dough for flatbreads, and tended small date palms in earthen pots. Men rose before dawn to irrigate their plots, guiding ox-drawn plows through furrows still damp with last night's canal water. Children chased one another with reed swords or practiced elementary cuneiform signs on scraps of clay, their laughter echoing against the sun-baked walls. Social hierarchy permeated every interaction. At the apex sat the Lugul or Ensi, kingly figures who claimed divine sanction, followed by a class of priests and temple administrators who managed economic affairs. Beneath them were artisans and merchants, potters shaping bowls on their wheels, metalworkers forging bronze sickles, weavers weaving wool into vibrantly dyed cloth. Farmers and herders formed the backbone, their labor undergirding the city-state's prosperity. At the bottom stood laborers, sharecroppers, and slaves, captives of war or indebted families, whose status could range from household servants to workers on massive public projects. Housing varied by means. Wealthy families lived in multi-room houses with flat roofs used for sleeping on warm nights, furnished with reed mats, low wooden stools, and storage alcoves plastered into the walls. A central hearth burned constantly, its smoke escaping through small openings in the roofing reeds. Poorer households occupied single-room dwellings, sharing their meals and sleeping quarters with animals, goats or poultry, kept for milk, meat, and eggs. Markets thrived in shaded courtyards and along the banks of the Euphrates. Traders from distant lands hawked lapis lazuli beads, carnelian bracelets, and fine cedarwood beams, while local merchants offered woven textiles, beer brewed from barley, and jars of sesame oil. Prices were negotiated in shekels of silver, and every transaction was sealed with the imprint of a cylinder seal, leaving a permanent record on clay tokens. Haggling was an art. Buyers tested the quality of grain by sight and weight, tapping jars to gauge their thickness, while sellers invoked temple priests to attest to the purity of their wares. Women played essential roles both inside and outside the home. In addition to managing domestic affairs, they worked in textile workshops, spinning flax into thread and weaving intricate patterns on vertical looms. Some rose to prominence as priestesses, overseeing temple granaries or serving as intermediaries in sacred marriage rituals. Widows could inherit property, and occasional legal records attest to women appearing before courts to press claims or negotiate dowries. Leisure found expression in music, board games, and storytelling. Bronze lyres and frame drums accompanied family gatherings. Children played with clay figurines shaped like animals. Adults amused themselves with royal board games like Metin, their stones marked with wedge symbols. Professional entertainers, singers, dancers, acrobats performed at temple festivals, but many also earned tips at taverns lining the canal banks, where beer flowed freely and philosophical debates about the gods or recent harvests ignited into spirited conversation. Education remained a path to social mobility. Successful scribes could rise from modest origins to serve in palace chanceries or govern temple estates. Girls from elite families sometimes learned to read omens and make offerings, though the acme of formal schooling lay with male scribes who spent years mastering lexical lists, legal formulae, and literary compositions. Even leisure and worship overlapped. Households kept small shrines to Alad, the hearth spirit, where daily offerings of oil and fresh water secured the family's well-being. During major festivals, the entire community poured into the streets, watching costumed rituals enact the cyclical dramas of creation, death, and rebirth. In these moments, distinctions of class and station blurred, as all participated in the rhythms that bound Sumerian society together. Through the routines of work, worship, and play, the people of Sumer forged a shared identity that transcended city boundaries. Their daily habits, grounding grain, negotiating in the market, invoking patron deities, became the threads of a larger tapestry, one that wove individuals into families, families into cities, and cities into the grand story of civilization. In understanding these ordinary moments, we glimpse how a society of mud brick homes and clay tablets could create an urban world whose influence still shapes our lives today. As the sun dipped below the flat horizon of southern Mesopotamia, the Sumerian cities, once bustling hubs of innovation, devotion, and daily toil, settled into a contemplative calm. In the courtyards, families lit oil lamps beside their hearth shrines. In the temples, priests performed last evening rites, anointing divine statues and closing clay doors to the inner sanctuaries. Yet behind this quiet lay a legacy that would outlive every brick of Uar and every reed of Eridu. Over centuries, conquerors and empires would sweep across the Fertile Crescent. Akkadian kings would fuse Sumerian and Semitic cultures. Babylonian rulers would refine their codes of law. And Assyrian armies would carry cuneiform tablets to distant capitals. But through every upheaval, the core inventions of the Sumerians, writing, mathematics, law, and urban society, remained indispensable. Their base, 60 arithmetic, endured in timekeeping and geometry. Their cuneiform script was adapted for dozens of languages. Their legal ideals permeated later codes from Hammurabi to Roman jurisprudence. Even the humble clay tablet, once cast aside by newer technologies, persists in the bricks of modern archaeology, each fragment a testament to voices from 5 millennia past. In the fields that once fed Uar's vast population, irrigation canals still trace patterns first dug by temple laborers. Underneath them lie layers of silt, and alongside these, layers of human ambition. When contemporary engineers map ancient channels, they rediscover the same principles of water management that made intensive agriculture possible. Farmers in today's Iraq and Syria, striving to reclaim productivity in challenging climates, find inspiration in techniques first developed by Sumerian hands. Museums around the world guard thousands of clay tablets, administrative records, law codes, literary masterpieces, astronomical logs. Scholars meticulously piece together shattered fragments, digitally scan wedge-shaped signs, and translate ancient Sumerian into modern tongues. Their work echoes the efforts of those first scribes, recording, preserving, and interpreting the human story. In lecture halls and online courses, students learn of the Epic of Gilgamesh not merely as myth, but as a window into universal themes: friendship, loss, the quest for meaning that link us to our distant ancestors. Archaeologists in goggles and dust-covered boots descend into trenches at Uruk and Kish, uncovering ziggurat foundations and palace mosaics. LiDAR surveys reveal city grids invisible to the naked eye. Ground-penetrating radar traces buried walls. Each discovery reshapes our understanding of Sumerian urban planning, reminding us that the concept of the city itself was born here. Organized streets, public spaces, administrative buildings, all arranged to balance the communal and the sacred. Meanwhile, the Sumerians' blend of empirical inquiry and ritual practice resonates in contemporary debates over science and belief. Their integration of observation, astronomical charts, surgical tools, mathematical proofs, with mythology and ceremony suggests a model of knowledge that values both rational analysis and the human need for meaning. In an age often divided between technocratic efficiency and spiritual longing, the Sumerian example offers a reminder that progress can encompass both. As we close this epic journey, we return to that first muddy floodplain, where 2 rivers met beneath white skies. There, the Sumerians looked at the waters and asked not only how to tame them, but how to honor them. They watched the stars and asked not only what they meant, but what place humanity might occupy among them. Through such questions, they invented everything that followed, From the first laws to the first poems, from the wheel to the ziggurat, from contracts in clay to calculations of the cosmos. Their civilization may have vanished into dust and memory, but its inventions persist in our cities, our calendars, our legal systems, and our stories. When we write an email, measure an angle, draft a contract, or even count out 60 seconds on a stopwatch, we enact a silent tribute to those artisans, priests, and thinkers who first pressed styluses into clay. The Sumerians cracked open the door to complexity, collaboration, and creativity, and in doing so, they invented the very idea of civilization itself. May this journey into their world deepen your appreciation for each innovation that we now take for granted, and may it inspire you to look at your own life, your own inventions, your own communities, and see in them the ongoing pulse of humanity's greatest endeavor, to create, to learn, and to leave something enduring behind.